Hello everyone, and here we are finally for the garden tour, the June garden tour 2021. And you might notice that we're not in the vegetable garden, and there's good reason for that, because before we get there I just want to show you a few other bits and bobs, because even though we've got a nice big dedicated vegetable garden, that's not where all of our growing takes place. And for example, this is just one little area outside the house here, and we've got blueberries just here, and we've got blueberry bushes in these pots dotted all around the house. We got all of these from just one plant that we've then tip layered into other pots, and there are probably 100 or more blueberries on just this one plant in this pot. And then down here we've got cranberries, which aren't actually the mother plant. These are ones that we have tip layered from the mother plant. And over there some more cranberries, and they've flowered really well, so we're expecting to get a fair amount of cranberries from our fruit bushes down there as well. And again, we've got more of these just dotted all over the place. Now I'll link to my video about tip layering, because if you've got soft fruit, and you can do it with almost all soft fruit, so raspberries, as I've mentioned, cranberries, blueberries, loganberries, and amongst other things, you can tip layer to basically propagate, and from one plant get loads of other plants. And like I said, I'll link to that video down below. Now also, as I come around the kitchen here, we've got 3 really productive fruit trees. So we've got a plum tree here. This guy is a really prolific fruiter. We'll get more plums off of this tree than we could possibly process. And the same applies for these 2 pear trees. Already, that's just this little area outside the kitchen, and then pretty much everywhere you look, my emphasis has been on food and growing food. So every plant we've introduced has been a food plant. So even back in here in the center of that little lawn there is a cherry tree, which does actually fruit, even though it's only little, and obviously it'll get bigger. Over there we've got a massive rhubarb patch, an olive tree which I haven't done anything with yet. It was on free cycle, so I grabbed it and brought it home, so I thought it's just as well here as anywhere else. Maybe in the future I'd love to process some olives from here. But even some of the hedgerows, you can see we've got elder flowers down there, and over there is horseradish. So everywhere you look, if we've had an influence on the garden, a lot of the gardens we haven't had any influence on, but everywhere you look, if we've had an influence on it, then it's to introduce edible plants. And back there, you're probably already familiar with my herb spiral. All this is to say that we're going to head over to my vegetable patch now, and we're going to talk predominantly about that. But it would be remiss of me to say that, you know, that's the only food that we're growing, because it's not. And just here, we've got some mint that we're drying. And again, you know, everywhere we look, if it's something that we've had some control over, then it's producing something for us that we can eat. So make sure that you hang on to the end of this video if you also want to see my wife's garden and the comparison as to how we're getting on, and some husband and wife competitive gardening. Now, as we approach the vegetable garden and the annual vegetable bed, then we're also flanked on the other side, as most of you guys will know, by our goats that are producing our milk. And from that we get all of our dairy products. And then just beyond, we've got our wood there, which is currently producing pork, and will soon be producing turkeys probably. And obviously we've got chickens pretty much anywhere you might stray. So up here we've got our main annual vegetable bed, and we'll get to that in a second, because we're going to start at the bottom and work up. So we'll start in the seedling polytunnel, if you like, where I'm growing seedlings, or the polytunnel that I'm using for seedlings. So we've got seedlings in this one, and then, you know, plants planted in the ground in the other one, and we'll get to that in a minute. So at the moment we've got, these are all chili peppers, different varieties. And then back here we've got everything that I've sown in the last couple of weeks. So we've got some succession planted beans, some bush beans, some Sinesta beans and purple teepee beans, the little bush French beans that I like. We've got some swede, lots of lettuce. This is lettuce, this is lettuce. We've got some more lettuce somewhere else down there on the floor, I think. Oh no, I know where they are. We'll get to them. What else? We've got some pak choy, some chard. This is purple sprouting broccoli. And then we've got our extra Brussels sprouts. Remember I said about doing these? I did these just recently. Brussels sprouts, white cabbage and Savoy cabbage, all germinating really well down here. So these really, everything in here is with a view to taking up the space that is currently given to potatoes in our main bed up there. And you'll see when we get there that we're going to need quite a bit to go in there, and we're going to need that to start coming along pretty soon. We do have some more seedlings though that we'll get to in a bit. This bit in between the two polytunnels is what I think of as like the perennial vegetable bed. We've got perennials all over the property obviously, but really because it's got two properly permanent things that will never be moved. One is the asparagus bed and the other one is the grapevine, and we've kind of populated the rest of the bed along those lines. So this is the asparagus bed, and then we've got some other perennials and other pots that aren't perennials just in front, and then the grapevine. So just like all of my main annual vegetable bed that we'll have a look at in a minute, when we moved in here it was completely overgrown, and this guy was as well. This whole area was just a jungle of weeds and brambles and hedging, and we cut it all back in order to make space for planting things. And it wasn't until the following spring that this grapevine popped up out of the wreckage, and as you can see, it's doing just fine, isn't it? So it's definitely due a prune, and that's something we'll do in the next week or two. But you can just see how prolific it is. You can look at any part of this plant and you'll just see these bunches of grapes starting to form, and you can just see there are literally hundreds of bunches of grapes on this vine. Now, we formed this structure last year, or maybe even a bit before then, but I think we formed it last year. And I did a video when we pruned all this back, and as you can see, every year it just comes really, really thick, and there's no way in the world that we could not prune it. We'd never get to any of it. So we'll prune this very soon so that it kind of is shaped up and over the structure that we've built there for it. But this is just something that we inherited, which is, how amazing is that? So this is a warts and all tour. This little bit behind here is full of weeds, and we need to come through and weed this because, among other things, we've got those two rhubarb plants that I transplanted. They were on the side of the road, free to a good home. And maybe I've been a little bit disingenuous. Does this look like a good home? I don't know. Maybe I'm not sure I've cared for them as well as I could have, but they're doing just fine. They're not worried. They're not worried at all by it. So we will come in here probably the same time we prune the grapevine. We'll come through and we'll just take the worst of these weeds out and feed those to the goats, just to give that rhubarb a little bit of space and light so that it can, do its thing. Down here we've got two hazels. These were salvaged from a garden, and I'm not sure where their final home will be. So we've got rosemary and lavender plants out here, but we've also got down here an amazing perennial herb. This is lovage. It's kind of a forgotten herb really, and this guy's almost expended the energy that it's been given in its little bucket. It's not got the best soil in there. I'm not sure what's going on with it actually. The top seems really sandy, which is unusual, but this is waiting to be transplanted into the herb spiral, and I just haven't got round to it yet. But lovage is kind of a forgotten herb. You can use it as a replacement for celery, but it's also got a kind of a curry leaf type flavour to it. I think it smells and tastes like a cross between curry and celery. So it's a great herb because it's also a perennial that will thrive in this climate. So I really need to get that in the ground, which again, we'll be getting to when we get to it over the next few weeks. And then moving through the front, before we go back and look at the rest of the actual perennials, we've got our containers through here. In here we've got some parsnips. I don't know how successful I'm going to be growing them in a container because they really do want to go down quite deep. But we've got a nematode that causes the roots to deform in our soil. So we actually can't grow them in the ground. We have tried and it's not worked. So hopefully this will be the first year we actually get parsnips, even if they are a little bit stunted due to the size of the pot they're in. Got one empty pot there, which will be filled with something over the course of the season, I'm sure. And then in here, we have our Jerusalem artichokes. Now, I planted these from basically Jerusalem artichokes that came back from the fruit and vegetable shop to go as pig feed because they were, you know, too far gone to be sold. But they are going great guns, and we're going to get a tremendous crop out of here. In an ideal world, you wouldn't actually harvest them until after the first frosts. So they're going to be in there a little while. Another name for them is sunchokes because they perform a little bit like sunflowers, and they've got beautiful little flowers on them. Or not that little, actually, quite big flowers. Not like a sunflower, but sunflower-style flowers up on the top of the stems. So it's going to be really interesting to see how these guys do in a container. And then the next up, we've got 3 containers of carrots. Now, interestingly, these guys were sown first out of these 3. We've got another container that was actually the first of them all, but out of these 3, this one was first. So interestingly, it's not actually doing as well as this one, which went in second. And then this one we only sowed in the last couple of weeks. So we will have carrots coming through for a little while. And again, it's a case of we will thin them out as they grow, and we'll show you that actually when we get to another container. Next up, we have some chickpeas. I have no idea what's going to happen with these. I sowed them originally for the shoots, thinking that I could use them like pea shoots, but turns out they're quite disgusting. So I won't be doing that again. So yeah, these are chickpeas, and I just figured I may as well leave them on and just see what happens, see if anything comes of them useful. These are peas. Now, these are sown too close together, really, and, you know, in this container, I'm not expecting them to give us many peas, but what we are going to do is harvest them for the shoots. And we'll just harvest them for pea shoots right through the season for salads and things. The rest of these buckets here, we've got potatoes. So these 3 and these 3 were the potatoes that went in first with our first and second earlies up at the other end of the bed. And as you can see back there, we are definitely ready to be harvesting these guys. So these guys will actually be coming out in the next day or 2. We've got plans for eating those. Yeah, the first of our potatoes are ready. We're there. Now, in front of the grapevine, we've got 2 rows of raspberries. Another reason why the grapevine needs pruning back is because it's kind of taking over. There's a row of raspberries just there, and here is our second one. And here's something else that is in need of a bit of attention. We really need to get some wire in here, a couple of posts and some wire running through to support these canes. They are performing, as you can see. We're getting lots of fruit setting on our raspberries. We've got a few other things going on back here, actually. You'll probably remember my tea plants, Camellia sinensis. Well, I potted them on, and I was really worried that they died. They, you know, look, they lost almost all their leaves, and just didn't look very well at all. But, you know, I've carried on watering them and doing everything I could, and they're all, this is the best one now, but they're all showing lots of new growth. So I'm really excited about that, because it means I'm going to be able to have probably 2 or 3 cups of tea which will have caffeine in September. So that's fantastic. If you're new to the channel and you're wondering what I'm going on about, in September I'm only eating things I can grow here. There's a few caveats that I won't get into right now because I don't want to bore people by mentioning them all the time. But basically, I'm only going to be eating things that I can be self-sufficient with. So having this tea, even if it's only a few leaves that I can take, is a really nice treat to know that it's there. It'll also help me to make at least 1 batch of kombucha in September that I can drink. So yeah, all 3 of them are showing new growth. Even this guy back here. So they're definitely alive. I don't know if it was the shock of transport, whether it was the shock of being repotted, or whether it's just part of the natural cycle of the plant that they overwinter and then drop all their leaves at the start of summer. I just don't know. But we're doing okay. That's the main thing. They're hanging in there. And then just in front of my tea plants, we've got this guy who is doing his best. This is a globe artichoke. Now that's another edible perennial, and it's a great edible perennial that, you know, it costs quite a lot of money to buy globe artichokes in the shops, and they're something that you can grow yourself. But I really struggle here. The ground seems to be, I think it just gets too wet in the winter, and I think it just gets waterlogged, because we had twins, and one of them didn't make it through the winter, and I do think that it's just because the ground is so heavy here that they get waterlogged. So I think what I might do is I might try and actually build a little raised area, just mound up some ground and plant a few in a raised area so that it's going to protect it from getting waterlogged in the winter. Obviously that's one way of curing that problem, one way of kind of mitigating it anyway. So this is my singular globe artichoke, which isn't going to give me a tremendous amount of food, but it is a perennial and it will come back every single year. And just in front of it, we've got 4 containers of various soft fruits. I can't tell you what they are, because they were a Christmas present to me and my wife. My wife planted them in these buckets, and she's got it written down in the house what they are. So unfortunately I can't tell you, but they're things like gooseberries and things like that. They came as little bare roots in the winter. Like I say, they were a Christmas present, and they're usually available at discount stores, and you know, they wouldn't have cost very much money, but they're a great gift. And again, they're something that's going to just go on producing for years and years and years. Speaking of, how about this? In my mind, this is the ultimate edible perennial, and that is asparagus. So this is my asparagus bed, and we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 productive plants. This is year 3, or their 3rd full year. So this is the first year that we can crop them, and we can crop them right through till the end of June. However, you might have noticed these 2 guys that I've already let go to fern. These 2 were just a little bit less vigorous than the other 5 plants. So I stopped cropping these guys a little bit earlier to allow them to put these sails up and start building up that energy for next year. What I didn't want to do is damage the productivity of the plant in the long term by being greedy in the short term. And I really don't need to, because we're getting about this much asparagus every 2 or 3 days. So, you know, it's just an amazing plant. I'm so happy that one of the first things that I did here was establish this asparagus bed. It will go on cropping for decades. And then we go from one extreme to the other, because here we have a plant that I'm super, super happy with, and that is really productive and is going to go on being so for a long, long time. Right next to it, we have a massive failure. This is my goji berry plant. And in terms of the plant's health, it's doing amazing. I bought this at the same size as these guys came, and as you can see, it's really doing really well, but it hasn't produced a single berry or a single flower. So this year is its last year. This is going to be goat food. I was going to give it all year and see what happened, but I think it's safe to say there's not a single flower on it. It's either not what it's supposed to be, or for whatever reason, it's not going to fruit. So this is future goat food, which frees up a little bit of space for me to plant something else. And then the very last plant that we have in this section here is just here. And this isn't for us to eat, but this is for our animals to eat. Now, this is something called wormwood, and it's an incredibly prolific plant. It took a little while to get established. It's only been in the ground about 2 years here, and again, we bought it as a tiny little plant, probably 12 inches tall. And now I think there were 2 plants I planted there, and now look at this. It's got woody stems like a small tree, and it produces so much growth. I would be able to cut that entire plant back to the ground twice a year and get that much or more from it. So it's a fantastic plant because it actually helps to treat worms in our animals. So generally speaking, the biggest thing we do to combat worms in our animals is we just keep really low stocking levels and we move them off different ground and allow the ground to have a break from parasites, from that parasitic cycle, as frequently as we possibly can. But in addition to that, we also use this plant, and that goes to our chickens, our goats, our pigs. Everybody gets some of that and they all eat it. So it's a very old-fashioned traditional treatment for worms. Next up is the tomato tunnel. Not just tomatoes in here. Oh, what a treat, look. Okay, so here we have our tomatoes all down this side and cucumbers down this side. And we are getting a tremendous amount of fruit and flowers. We're so far ahead of where we were last year. Look just over here. So these are predominantly money makers and gardener's delight because I've just gone for yield. Now, I wish I'd planted more plum tomatoes because it's going to be a bit of a pain making sauces, or not a bit of a pain, I just would have been better off making sauces with more plum tomatoes. But you know, it is what it is and we'll manage. But I'm being more aggressive with my pruning this year than I've ever been before. So it'll be interesting to see what sort of effect that has on my yield ultimately. This guy here is about, well, it's getting on for 4 foot tall. And I think this time last year, I was lucky if I had one a foot tall. So, and I'm not sure we had any fruit setting. I know that we were really, really late to the party last year with our tomatoes. I don't think we got any fruit in the house until August or maybe even September. It was ridiculous. But I think we're going to maybe get some fruit. I'd love to say by the end of June, but I'm not sure. I think that might be a bit early. But we're not far away, are we? That first tomato with goat's cheese is, it is something very special. And our cucumbers are also coming. We've got some flowers. Got some flowers on our cucumber. So again, it won't be long until we're harvesting from in here as well. How exciting. We've got a couple of other pepper plants down at the front. And as you saw, those rogue strawberries that creep in from the other side of that wall, which is where we're going next. So here is our amazingly productive strawberry patch. We are bringing into the house a breakfast bowl full of strawberries every single day. And it's just doing amazingly well. Now, obviously, as you guys know, I've got a full-time job. My wife has a full-time job. And, you know, if we didn't, then there's nothing I'd like more than to spend a lot more time out here making everything look pretty and weeding it and what have you. And I'd love it if I could come and show you this and it'd be beautiful rows of strawberry plants with no weeds in there. But I can't do that because I haven't got the time. And as much as I would love that to be the case, it's just not. But it is ridiculously productive. And everywhere you look, it is just teeming with strawberries. So we've already started saving some of those strawberries. We're bringing them in quicker than we can eat them, and we've started making some compots that we've frozen. We've also just made some, not compote, but just like blended up the strawberries, put a little bit of honey in it, froze that. We've also started dehydrating some, so we're just preserving them all the different ways that we can, and I'll be using them a lot in September for puddings. Okay, so now we're on to the main vegetable bed, and again we'll start at this end and work our way up. At the front here we've got our perpetual spinach that we put in early in the season, and some of it has gone to seed already. Look, this stuff's bolting. So we'll pull this out, which is fine because we've got these guys that have declined, and there's a few more sown in between these guys that are much younger plants that'll take their place. Plus we've got succession plantings in the polytunnel, so these guys will, they might not be in the polytunnel actually, they might be out here. We'll get to them because we've got quite a lot of seedlings actually out here in the garden. So this perpetual spinach that's gone to seed, it doesn't worry me. We've got plenty of it and plenty more on the way. Up through here, staying right on the edge, we've got garlic. Now, this is garlic. I'm actually going to harvest some of this right now in front of you, because this is garlic that we've basically perennialized. Now, we've had this garlic in the ground. I planted this in our first season here, so almost 3 years ago. And we harvested garlic from elsewhere that year, but along here we let some of it stay. And let's have a look at what's going on. So this here would have been one clove just 3 years ago. And the only thing to be aware of if you do this is it's going to get a little bit deeper than you might be used to. So let's have a look at what one garlic clove can give you if you leave it in the ground. Now, this is one of the things that I spoke about with Liz Zorab when I had her on the podcast. Liz Zorab from By the Farm. And she does this too. And what she said was, and I agree, that you tend to get, rather than a bulb of cloves, you tend to get just one ball like this, but it is punchy, really full of flavour. You don't need as much of it. I mean, you can probably imagine, I eat a lot of garlic. I love garlic. But that there will probably be enough to do me for the whole of September. Well, yeah, I should think so. It's basically a piece of garlic every single day there. There's got to be 30 at least. And every single one of them will have the same flavour as in several cloves. So all that is from one clove of garlic. So you can see why I like to leave it and just let it do its thing. So if you've got the space, overplant. Plant enough garlic that you want to harvest this year, and then plant another 10, 20 cloves and just leave them. Put them somewhere you can leave them. So the rest of this section of the bed up to the path is just filled with various brassicas, and then I've interplanted with a couple of things. We've got the odd beetroot. Look at this guy down here. He's definitely ready to come in the house, actually. So we'll take him. So we've got the odd beetroot and a fair few radish, some of which have run to seed, which they'll do really quickly at this time of year. We just planted radishes to fill the spaces, basically, that we had in between a lot of our plants. So we've probably got 50 or so radishes just spread out through this area in between everything else. Now, in the back there, we've got our red cabbages at the back, which you can probably see. In front of them, we've got some Savoy cabbage. We've got a few Brussels sprout plants here. You can barely make them out because the pigeons have had a go. And then various other brassicas. We've got cauliflower and broccoli down through the rest of the bed. And it's all been interplanted with, as I say, these radishes and the beetroot. And then back here, we've got a block of spring onions. They're quite hard to make out, I imagine. That's not a spring onion. That'll be a purple sprouting broccoli. So we've got a block of spring onion here. And then back there, we've got our leeks. A nice big block of leeks here. And we filled any little gaps with these beetroot because they're quite a fast crop. So we'll be able to, they'll be out the way before these brassicas have recovered from their pigeon damage. And then, of course, behind our red cabbage there, we've got our broad beans. And I'm not harvesting those now because I'm harvesting those tomorrow. And we are having... So if you've never had broad beans like this, you need to have it. You do it with or without the asparagus, but we've got the asparagus to use. So we're doing broad beans and asparagus pan fried with garlic and bacon. And oh my goodness, it's going to be amazing. I'm not even sure what the rest of the dish is going to be, but I know that we're having that. This time last year, again, our broad beans weren't doing nearly as well. They were absolutely ravaged by aphids, and we've not had nearly as much aphid damage this year. So That's fantastic news. Although literally as I say that, look, yeah, I've just spotted these guys on here. And our broad beans give way across the back to peas. And we've got sugar snap peas and regular garden peas. And again, these guys have been amazing this year. Really early and just really prolific. Now we all know that garden peas are a bit of a faff to shell, but I don't mind doing it, I've got to say, when I've got the time. But my son, oh, they're delicious just like that. My son will shell them if I pay him in peas that he can eat straight out the pod. So sweet. So that concludes the first section of the main vegetable bed. Next to that, we've got asparagus peas. We're working from the back to the front now. These are asparagus peas. And to give you a bit of perspective, I'll just take a step back. And they're in a block behind our block of sweet corn. So as you can see, the sweet corn's there, that's pretty obvious. And then there's this block of asparagus peas just behind it. And some comfrey, which we're gradually getting rid of on our bed. So I've not grown asparagus peas before. They don't need support. And I've no idea what they taste like, although someone has told me not very nice. Someone in one of these videos, actually. But we'll wait and see. Who knows? They might be my favourite. Doubt it, but they might be. Down here we've got 2 volunteer potato plants, which I've just let go because why not? And again, a few more brassicas, which you might or might not be able to pick out down through here. They've all of my brassicas have been heavily nibbled. Back here we've got our Brussels sprout plants. I think we've just got 5. Again, they've taken a real hammering from the birds, but they will come right. They will. I know they will. I just need to be patient. I've got quite a bit of grass I need to pull out of this little bit of bed, but this here is a block of swede. So we've got lots of swede in this section here, and then another load that we've just sown in that section there, and in front of that some of our lettuce. So we've been harvesting cut and come again type lettuce so far, and we've also been using the spinach for our leafy salad, but we've got a few iceberg type lettuce like this one here, which is forming a lovely big head. He's nearly ready to come in. And there's a few more elsewhere on the bed. We've also had some nasturtium leaves, which I love in my salad. You probably noticed a couple of plants as we've been walking that I just didn't happen to mention. They were self-seeded. Then up behind me here, you can see just there, squeezed in between those beans and the sweet corn, is a row of calabrese broccoli. And then up here, you've obviously got a row of beans. These are dwarf French beans, and they are almost ready to crop. They're such a prolific plant. Again, I talk about the varieties of dwarf French beans I grow all the time, and we use Sinesta and Purple TP, and they're just so prolific. And then we've got our onions, 3 rows of onions, regular onions, and then we're on to beetroot, which regular viewers will know is a big favourite of our family. Now this year I bought, and that's what these guys are, some golden something. It's a yellow variety of beetroot. And I have to say, we won't be using them again. They're okay, they're fine, but they don't have nearly the flavour or the sweetness that the red ones do. These are Choggia, Choggia, and they've just got this amazing sweetness and flavour that my family cannot get enough of, cooked or raw. And the yellow ones just a little bit underwhelming. There's nothing wrong with them, and they'll all get eaten, and they're perfectly palatable, but they don't have that beautiful sweetness that the red ones do, so we'll steer clear of those. I neglected to talk about the actual paths and what's on them as we were going, so I will just come back here a second, because we've got, firstly, in between the stepping stones, I've sown basil in between every single stepping stone over the whole bed, and that's coming on to varying degrees. But some, like this patch, is coming on really well, some patches not so much. We've also got some basil in pots here. I can't grow enough basil. And then in here, these are our first carrots, and we've been thinning these already, so we can take a few more of these out whenever we're ready. As you can see, they're now of the size where we can actually use them as a carrot vegetable, you know, to serve with a roast dinner or whatever, rather than just as little tiny carrots to go in salads. One thing you want to be really careful of if you're harvesting carrots this time of year is not to snap the root, because that's when carrot root fly will get a whiff of that. They'll smell it and they'll be in like a shot and they'll infect your whole crop. So definitely, if you're going to dig them up this time of year, be very careful not to damage the roots. And then over on this path, again, as you can see, we've got basil coming up in between the stepping stones there, more basil behind, and some Brussels sprout seedlings my wife got me for Father's Day. I think she saw the pathetic state that mine were in. And then back there we've got some herbs. Again, they're on their way to the herb spiral. And back there in little seed modules, we've got our next succession sowing of beetroot. And these are the little red choggier ones that are delicious, and they're pretty much ready to go in the ground. We've got a few more nasturtiums down through here and some more garlic, which again, if I want to harvest that now, I planted that this season and that would come out as a bulb, you know, as a bulb with cloves on. And then right at the back of this path we've got another block of leeks. This is a different variety. This is Leon, and the first variety were Musselburgh. I'm not sure which variety I grew last year, if I'm honest, so it'd be interesting to see the difference this year. And as we move along the back here, our peas now give way to beans. We've got borlotti beans and some just general runner beans, and as you can see over here, they're starting to really get on with it. It won't be long until we're pulling runner beans off our vines and processing them. Those that we have so many of those, we save a load of those in the freezer. They're really useful to get us through the winter. And then back here, as you can see, we've got a few more lettuce. We've got some lettuce just dotted around anywhere you can fit them in. Much like the beetroot and the radish that I mentioned before, you know, they're a fairly quick crop. They're a crop we can't grow too much of, and you know, we're just going to squeeze them in where we can. Speaking of lettuce, there's a row that I've direct sown just here in the last few days. So that brings us on to our potatoes. So this entire section, which is basically, it's a little under a quarter of our bed, is all main crop potatoes. And they're going to want another couple of months in the ground. But as you can see, we've devoted quite a lot of space to them this year. And then we've got a row of cabbage, greyhound cabbage, up the side of the path. I'm finding myself needing to do more weeding this year, and I think because I was an idiot earlier in the frosts and I used hay instead of straw to cover up some of my plants, and all the grass seed has just got into the compost. There you go. What are you going to do? So back here at the back of the bed, we've got 3 or 4 pumpkin plants. Now, the idea is I'm actually going to trail them up that fence. We're going to take back some of that hedge, get them attached up on that fence, and maybe use the canes here, which I know we'll need to reinforce if we do that, to have them come forwards as well. We'll just see how it goes, see how much space they need, see how much space everything else takes up, because we can also just trail them down behind along the back, which is what we did with our butternut squash last year. In here we've got another patch of sweet corn. We're growing 2 different varieties again. So the sweet corn we were growing back at the start of the bed there, that is Goldcrest, and this one is called Conqueror. So it'll be interesting again to see how they compare. In here we've got a bare patch. We've just taken out the last of our chard that had all run to seed. That's all gone to the animals. So we've got some space to plant in there, which we'll fill very, very soon. And then we're on to our first and second earlies, which fill up the remainder of this bed, with a few exceptions, which we will get to. So again, our first and second earlies, you can see our second earlies are flowering. Our first earlies haven't, but they don't always. And these are going to be starting to come out as soon as we've used up basically the potatoes from the bucket. So we'll harvest our first earlies that were in those buckets that I spoke about first. Then once we've eaten them, and we'll be using them all fresh and you know, digging them as we need them. And it's lovely actually to feel like we've got a full bed rammed with crops being productive that we're harvesting, and that we're going to sort of cycle through these potatoes, and we've got more seedlings and crops ready to go in, bang, as soon as the space frees up. It just feels really good. It feels like we couldn't be doing any more to be making food. And, you know, that's what it's all about, isn't it? And then in between these 2 rows of potatoes, we've got a row of courgettes. Now, originally I planted 11, and we've lost, well, we haven't quite lost, but 3 or 4 of them have got absolutely battered again. But we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 left, which is great. I'm really happy about that. I'd rather have 7 than 11, because 7 is slightly too many, so 11 is ridiculous. But, you know, we're starting to see flowers here as well. And, you know, it's not going to be long at all before we're harvesting courgettes. And that's another, like, there's so many, like, punctuation marks to the season. You know, your first broad bean, your first tomato, and your first courgette. There's your first piece of asparagus. The first of everything, let's be honest. But, you know, the courgettes are like this whole other category of summer squash. And, yeah, I can't wait. I can't wait for that abundance and that variety. It's what a fantastic time of year. What a fantastic thing to be doing. I'm so lucky. And then the only thing I think that we haven't mentioned is our Egyptian walking onions. Anyone who's been following me for any length of time will know how much I love these guys. If there is a plant that says abundance, and if there is a plant that says ease of use, and if there is a plant that says I will just give and give and give, it's these guys. Just look here. That is a crop of onions. Little tiny onions. 7 or 8 there, and look how many there are. Now, obviously they're not the size of regular onions, they're tiny, but look how many there are. You can also harvest the onions that are below the ground, you know, the main bulb, which are bigger. And what we've been doing this year, a ridiculous amount, is just harvesting and using these green shoots, and we use them just like spring onions. And I mean, literally just like spring onions. Salads, stir fries. Now, while we're talking about Egyptian walking onions, if you were there on my last live stream, you'll already know this, but if you weren't, I'm giving away some onion bulbs, some of the Egyptian walking onion bulbs, these guys that you plant in your garden. Now, I started with just 5 bulbs less than 2 years ago. From those 5 bulbs, 2 of them died and 3 of them grew here in this big clump that is my mother plant now. And from those 3 bulbs, I've populated this whole bed in less than 2 years. They really are an amazing, amazing plant. And I'm giving them away to you. All you need to do is one of 2 things. You don't need to do them both, but one of 2 things. You can either become a patron of Self-Sufficient Hub at patreon.com, or if you already are one, then you've already qualified. Or you can come and join our live stream on Sunday at 12 noon UK time, and ask for them in the chat. That's all you need to do. You have to actually be there live when the live stream's going out, but if you are there in the live stream and you ask for some, then I will post them out to you. And if you're a patron and you ask for some, you could do that right away. You don't need to wait till Sunday. Just send me an email or contact me any of the other ways you know you can, and I will gladly send you some Egyptian walking onion bulbs. The only thing to bear in mind, if your country where you live has restrictions on things coming into the country, then that's completely your responsibility. I'm afraid I can't do much about that. So if you tell me that I need to write something specific on an envelope, that's fine. I can do that, but I'm not able to, you know, spend the time to work out what the customs regulations are or fill out any paperwork. So if you want to fill out whatever paperwork might be required, by all means, but I'm happy to send the bulbs. So that's everything in my garden. And I know what you're probably thinking, well, what about Jackie's garden? Because Jackie's got her own separate little plot, and it's just down the bottom here. And my wife and I are extremely competitive. We're about as competitive as anyone we know. and I don't see why it should be any different for gardening. Now, it has to be said, my wife's plot is a little bit smaller than mine, but I think it's great to show that you don't need a huge space to grow your own food. And this is my wife's plot, and she is comfortably winning in pretty much every single category that she's entered. It's just phenomenal. So her beetroot back here, she's harvested more than I have so far, and every single one of hers is a really decent size. She's got outdoor tomatoes that are giving mine a run for their money in the polytunnel, which is phenomenal. Her peas, they might not be cropping as heavily as mine, but they're looking pretty healthy. Her carrots are doing at least as well as mine, and they started months later, certainly weeks later. And look, her beans and all of her other climbers are just doing amazingly well. They're not quite cropping the peas as readily as mine, but they are cropping. And, almost everything that my wife put in, she put in my cast-offs when it comes to the tomatoes. She planted the tomatoes that I'd left for dead. So, it's just amazing. And the one tomato that she does have undercover is almost as tall as I am. So there's no two ways about it. She's winning. If we adjust for anything, if we were to take into account the fact that she started later with a lot of them, and that she's been growing my cast-offs in some number at least, she's definitely winning. There's no two ways about it. But she's got cucumbers going on in here. She's got Inca berries, ground cherries. Inca berries that she's overwintered from last year. I'm so proud of her. I didn't think we were going to make it, or I didn't think she was going to manage it. And it's not because I don't have faith in her. It just seemed like an almost impossible project to manage to overwinter them, but she did it. So I'm so proud of her. And we had Inca berries last year, and we're going to get more this year. She's also got pepper plants up here, and cucumbers and squash, all going on. And when you also add into the mix the amount of compost that I add to my soil and the mulch and everything else that I do, this here was just a piece of grass that she laid some plastic down over. See that plastic at the back? She just laid that plastic down over there and put the tiniest bit of compost on after she'd lifted it off after a couple of months, and just planted straight into it. And away she goes. You don't have to overthink these things. And I'm not trying to say that that no thought's gone into this. Of course I'm not. My wife has worked incredibly hard, especially to put the trellising up and everything else. And I'm incredibly impressed by how well it's doing. I spent a long time picking where I was going to put my vegetable plot to get the most sun. Jackie's up against the shade of these trees as well, so I've got every advantage in my plot, and she's still winning. So good for you, Jackie. Good for her. Yeah, so like I say, this plot is maybe 1.5 meters by 1.5 meters, and it's got an absolute abundance growing in it. It's got carrots, it's got tomatoes, it's got beetroot, it's got peas, and it's got sunflowers on every corner. And back there it's even smaller. It's probably 1.5 meters by less than a meter, and we've got all sorts of climbers up in there, beans and peas, and some tomatoes I can see. So you don't need a huge space to grow your own food, and you don't need to worry too much about soil amendments and treatments and everything else and how you're going to do it. You can just get on and do it, and you will grow food. So yeah, this one definitely is wife 1, me 0 for sure. So there you go. That's my garden tour for June. And I have to say that this June is certainly more abundant than last June. We're certainly cropping more. I didn't expect to be harvesting anything this evening. Look, isn't that beautiful? Look at those colours. Oh. Well, I hadn't actually intended on heading into the house with all of this, but There you go. You never know what you're going to come home with, do you? Anyway, it's actually getting a little bit dark here. We've been out here quite a while. So I'm heading in. That's going to wrap me up. Thank you ever so much for watching. I genuinely appreciate it. Please make sure that you press that like button if you've liked this video. Leave me a comment down below. Make sure you're subscribed to my channel. Come check us out elsewhere. Come check out the podcast. Come and check us out on Facebook. We've got an awesome Facebook group, the Self-Sufficient Hub Facebook group. It's a lot of fun. It's rapidly growing. Come and check us out there. It's a lovely community. And I will speak to you guys really soon. Thanks for watching. Cheers.